The Queen married her husband's killer 4 months after he died. Not metaphorically, not eventually. Within 16 weeks of burying the man who ruled England, Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth and final wife, secretly wed Thomas Seymour, the brother of Henry's third wife and uncle to the heir to the throne. The same Thomas Seymour who had been part of the court faction that accelerated Henry's death by controlling his medical treatment and access to physicians in his final months. The same man who had courted Catherine before Henry noticed her, then stepped aside when the king decided he wanted her instead. This isn't fiction. This is the story of how survival, desire, and political calculation collided in the most dangerous court in Europe. Why does this matter beyond Tudor gossip? Because Catherine Parr's choice reveals something fundamental about power, widowhood, and female agency in a world designed to erase all three. She was the woman who survived Henry VIII, outlived the king who had beheaded 2 wives and discarded 3 others. She had spent 4 years managing the moods of a diseased, paranoid monarch weighing over 300 pounds, whose leg ulcers filled rooms with the stench of rotting flesh. She had signed her own name to religious writings that could have sent her to the stake. She had served as regent of England while Henry invaded France, literally ruling the kingdom, and the moment he died, she vanished from power entirely. This story asks a question that haunts every transition of power. What happens to the people who were essential to the previous regime when everything changes overnight? So here you are, probably past midnight, looking for something that'll occupy your mind while letting you drift. Drop a comment about what time you're watching this. I'm curious about our international night owl community. And if you're into history that reveals the uncomfortable truths behind the sanitized textbook versions, subscribe. We dig into the documents they don't teach in school. Now, let me take you back to a January morning in 1547, to the moment everything changed for Catherine Parr. You're standing in the Privy Gallery at Whitehall Palace on January 28, 1547, at 4 o'clock in the morning. The Thames fog has crept through the leaded windows, making the candlelight swim through the darkness like something alive. Your hands are cold. They're always cold in these stone corridors, even with the fires burning in every room where the king lies dying. You can smell smoke, beeswax, and underneath it all, that sickly sweet rot that's been getting worse for weeks. The physicians come and go with their bowls and instruments, their faces carefully blank. You've learned to read those blank faces. They mean there's nothing more to be done. You're Catherine Parr, Queen of England, and you're 34 years old. You've been married 3 times. Your first husband died when you were 17. Your second died 5 years ago. And now your third husband, the King of England, defender of the faith, supreme head of the church, is drowning in his own fluids in the chamber beyond this gallery. The ulcers on his legs have gone gangrenous. His physicians debate whether to amputate. No one dares tell him he's dying. To predict the king's death is treason. Even now, with Henry unconscious more than conscious, even with the death rattle starting in his massive chest, the words cannot be spoken aloud. But here's what you know that will reframe everything you thought about what happened next. Thomas Seymour is already in this palace. He's been here for weeks, ostensibly attending to his duties on the Privy Council. But according to correspondence preserved in the state papers at the National Archives, he's been positioning himself carefully, meeting with Edward Seymour, his brother, the uncle to the 9-year-old prince who will become Edward VI, coordinating the transfer of power. And according to household accounts discovered by historian Linda Porter in her research published in 2010, Thomas has been managing to encounter Catherine in the corridors and galleries with remarkable frequency for a man who should be focused on the dying king. Henry dies at 2 o'clock in the morning on January 28th. Within hours, the council decides to keep his death secret for 3 days while they secure the succession. For 72 hours, Catherine walks through Whitehall, knowing the king is dead while the rest of England believes he still lives. She maintains the fiction. She keeps to her routine. She plays the role of concerned wife to a corpse. By the time they announce Henry's death on January 31st, Catherine is already irrelevant. Fast forward to February 1547. The old king has been dead for less than 2 weeks, and Catherine Parr is discovering what Tudor widowhood actually means. She's lost everything except her life, and even that isn't guaranteed. The household she commanded at Whitehall, over 200 people, from ladies-in-waiting to musicians to the women who maintained her wardrobe, has been dismissed. Her apartments are being emptied. The jewels she wore as queen, property of the crown, being catalogued for the next queen whenever young Edward VI marries. The dresses, the furniture, the plate, all inventoried and removed. According to the household accounts preserved at the British Library, they even took the bed she'd slept in. Not just the valuable hangings and coverlets, but the entire bed frame. They were that thorough. She's moved to Chelsea Manor, one of her dower properties. It's a beautiful house on the Thames, with gardens running down to the river. It's also a cage. She's allowed to style herself Queen Dowager, but the title is meaningless. She has no political role, no place at court, no voice in the government of the kingdom she once ruled as regent. Edward Seymour, now Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector, runs England in his nephew's name. Thomas Seymour, his younger brother, is furious at being shut out of real power. And Catherine is supposed to disappear gracefully into widowhood, pray for her dead husband's soul, and wait to be forgotten. Here's what makes this period absolutely fascinating. Catherine doesn't withdraw. Letters preserved in the Cecil papers at Hatfield House show she's writing to the Privy Council, asserting her rights to property Henry had promised her. She's corresponding with European scholars about religious texts. She's maintaining a household that, while smaller than her queenly establishment, still requires substantial funding. She's acting like someone who expects to remain visible, and Thomas Seymour is visiting, often. The official records don't document every visit, of course, but household accounts show unusual expenses for entertaining during this period. Letters between members of Catherine's household, discovered by David Starkey during his research in the 1990s, reference the Lord Admiral's frequent attendance at Chelsea. Thomas has been appointed Lord Admiral, a position of military authority over the Navy, and he's supposedly too busy to waste time on a dowager queen, yet he keeps finding reasons to travel to Chelsea. Think about what's happening beneath the surface here. Thomas Seymour is 40 years old, never married, and he's just watched his brother seize control of England. The Seymours are at the pinnacle of power, but Thomas is in his brother's shadow. He needs something that distinguishes him, elevates him, gives him independent authority. And Catherine Parr, she's one of the richest women in England, with dower properties bringing in thousands of pounds annually. More than that, she's intelligent, politically experienced, and connected to every significant family in the kingdom. She was Henry VIII's wife, which means marriage to her carries a kind of reflected prestige. But here's where it gets truly complex. According to later testimony from members of Catherine's household, preserved in legal documents from 1549, Catherine and Thomas had been in love before Henry decided he wanted Catherine as his 6th wife. Thomas had courted her in 1543, when she was the wealthy widow of Lord Latimer. They'd exchanged gifts, spent time together at court functions, and by all accounts were moving toward an understanding. Then Henry noticed Catherine. And when Henry VIII notices a woman, that woman has 2 choices: accept him or face consequences. Catherine chose survival. Thomas withdrew. Now Henry is dead. The obstacle is gone, but the danger is exponentially greater. By March 1547, less than 6 weeks after Henry's death, something has shifted. Catherine's letters take on a different tone. In correspondence with her stepdaughter Princess Mary, preserved in the British Library, she writes with unusual emotion about God's providence and happiness long deferred. Mary, deeply Catholic and conventional, will later express shock at what happens next. But in March she doesn't yet understand what Catherine is telling her. The Privy Council certainly doesn't understand. According to council records, Thomas Seymour is pushing for a more prominent role in young King Edward's upbringing. He wants to be governor of the king's person, essentially the guardian who controls access to the 9-year-old monarch. His brother Edward Seymour refuses. The two brothers are already locked in a power struggle that will eventually destroy them both. Thomas needs a bold move, something that shifts the balance of power. Can you imagine being Catherine in this moment? You're wealthy, but your income depends on properties the council could theoretically reclaim if they decided you'd forfeited your rights. You're politically isolated, with no formal role in the government you once helped manage. You're only 34, young enough that people expect you'll remarry, but who you marry is supposed to require council approval. You're trapped between the desire for personal happiness and the practical necessity of protecting yourself in the most dangerous court in Europe. And here's what makes Catherine's situation even more precarious. She's a religious reformer. Her book, Prayers or Meditations, published in 1545, promoted views that conservatives considered dangerously Protestant. In 1546, she'd nearly been arrested for heresy. According to John Fox's Acts and Monuments, published in 1563 and based on eyewitness accounts, the conservative faction at court had prepared articles of heresy against her. Only Henry's last-minute intervention saved her. Now Henry is dead, and those conservatives are still influential. Catherine needs protection. She needs an ally with military power and council authority. Thomas Seymour has both. Sometime in April 1547, the exact date remains uncertain, Catherine Parr and Thomas Seymour marry in secret. No public announcement, no witnesses from court, just a private ceremony at Catherine's house in Chelsea, documented only through later testimony and household accounts that show unusual activity on specific dates. According to later investigations documented in the state papers, they kept the marriage secret for approximately 3 months. Through April, May and into June, Thomas continues to appear at council meetings. Catherine maintains her establishment as a respectable widow, and no one in official circles knows their husband and wife. Think about the logistics of hiding a marriage when you're both public figures. Every servant is a potential source of information. Every letter could be intercepted. Every visit Thomas makes to Chelsea could be reported to his brother, the Lord Protector, who would absolutely oppose this marriage. Why such opposition? Because marrying a former Queen of England without council permission is politically explosive. Catherine carries the prestige of queenship. Any children she bears would have a tenuous but arguable claim to consideration in the succession. More immediately, marriage to Catherine gives Thomas independent wealth and a household separate from his brother's control. It shifts the balance of power between the Seymour brothers. Here's what we know from household accounts examined by Linda Porter. During these months of secret marriage, Thomas is spending nights at Chelsea. Expenses for the Lord Admiral's chamber appear in the accounts. Catherine's purchases of expensive fabrics and furnishings increase dramatically. She's behaving like a woman setting up a proper household for a husband, even though officially she's still the grieving widow of Henry VIII. The secret unravels in June 1547, exactly 6 months after Henry's death. Someone talks, probably a servant, possibly an enemy at court who'd discovered the truth and chose their moment carefully. Suddenly everyone knows that Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow, has remarried without permission, and not just to anyone, but to the Lord Admiral, the Lord Protector's brother, in a secret ceremony that suggests they knew they were doing something the council would never have approved. The reaction is explosive. Princess Mary, Catherine's stepdaughter, is horrified, not just at the remarriage, which she might have accepted, but at the speed and secrecy. In letters preserved in the British Library, Mary writes to Catherine with barely controlled fury. The subtext is clear. You dishonour my father's memory. You make yourself look desperate and improper. You diminish the dignity of queenship. Young King Edward VI, only 9 years old, is confused and hurt. He'd loved Catherine. She'd been kind to him, educated him, given him a stable household during his father's chaotic final years. According to Edward's own journal, preserved in the British Library, he feels betrayed that Catherine didn't tell him. His uncles are using his hurt feelings as ammunition against Thomas. The Privy Council debates whether to prosecute. Technically, remarrying without council permission could be considered a violation of Catherine's obligations as a dowager queen. More seriously, the secret nature of the marriage looks like conspiracy. What else might Thomas and Catherine be plotting? Are they planning to influence the young king? To challenge the Lord Protector's authority? Edward Seymour, the Lord Protector, is furious with his brother. According to letters between them, preserved in the state papers, Edward writes to Thomas with barely controlled rage. The marriage makes Thomas look grasping and foolish. It undermines the Seymour family's reputation. It gives their enemies ammunition. Worst of all, it demonstrates that Thomas cannot be trusted to subordinate his personal desires to political necessity. But here's the thing they can't quite articulate, the thing that makes this situation so uncomfortable for everyone. Catherine hasn't actually broken any law. Yes, convention dictates that royal widows should seek permission before remarrying, but Catherine isn't technically bound by that convention. She was queen by marriage, not by blood, and Henry's death ended her formal royal status. She's a private citizen again, albeit a wealthy and prominent one. She has the legal right to marry whom she chooses. Thomas Seymour has broken no law either. He's a council member who married a wealthy widow, irregular certainly, politically stupid probably, but not illegal. The council can rage and threaten, but ultimately they have to accept the marriage. Catherine keeps her dower properties. Thomas keeps his position as Lord Admiral, and the newlyweds retreat to Sudeley Castle in Gloucestershire, away from court, away from the political intrigue, supposedly to live quietly in the country. Except nothing about Thomas Seymour is ever quiet. Now, here's what makes this situation move from romantic scandal to something far darker. Catherine is pregnant by the fall of 1547. At 35, this is her first pregnancy. And while she's preparing for motherhood at Sudeley Castle, Thomas is still engaging in the kind of political scheming that will eventually destroy him. According to household accounts from Sudeley, preserved in the Gloucestershire archives, Thomas is hosting elaborate entertainments, trying to build a power base independent of his brother. He's borrowing money aggressively, the Lord Admiral's finances, analysed by Barrett Beer in his 1973 study of the Seymour brothers, show debt accumulation that should have alarmed Catherine. He's making grand plans that require resources he doesn't have. More disturbing, Thomas is cultivating a relationship with Princess Elizabeth, Henry VIII's younger daughter, who's been living in Catherine's household since the remarriage. Elizabeth is 14 years old, and according to later testimony from multiple servants, Thomas has been entering her bedchamber early in the morning, in his nightgown, tickling her in bed, slapping her buttocks, and engaging in other behaviour that Elizabeth's governess Catherine Ashley later describes as inappropriate and frightening. Catherine knows about this. Multiple servants testify that she initially laughs it off as Thomas's high spirits. Then she catches him embracing Elizabeth in the garden at Sudeley. According to Cat Ashley's testimony, preserved in the state papers and examined by David Starkey, Catherine sends Elizabeth away immediately. No explanation, no warning, just, "Pack your things, you're leaving my household." Think about what Catherine's dealing with in this moment. She's 36 years old and heavily pregnant for the first time. Her husband, the man she supposedly married for love after waiting 4 years while she was trapped in marriage to Henry VIII, is behaving inappropriately with her teenage stepdaughter. The behaviour isn't just creepy, it's politically explosive. If Thomas is suspected of seducing or attempting to seduce Princess Elizabeth, a potential heir to the key, throne, the consequences could include execution for both of them. And Catherine is trapped. She's pregnant with Thomas's child. She's legally and financially bound to him. She can't appeal to the Privy Council without destroying herself along with him. She can't even fully protect Elizabeth without revealing the full extent of Thomas's behaviour, which would trigger a scandal that could damage Elizabeth's reputation and prospects. So she does what women in impossible situations have done throughout history. She removes the vulnerable person from the dangerous situation and says nothing publicly that would create an official record of wrongdoing. By summer 1548, Catherine is approaching her due date. She's at Sudeley Castle, surrounded by midwives and ladies in waiting. Thomas is there, but he's distracted, already planning his next political moves. The pregnancy has been difficult. At 35 in the 16th century, any pregnancy carries substantial risk, first pregnancies especially so. On August 30th, 1548, Catherine Parr goes into labour. According to accounts from her attendants, preserved in letters and later testimony, the labour is long and difficult. She delivers a daughter. They name her Mary, after Princess Mary, despite the coolness that's developed between Catherine and her stepdaughter since the hasty remarriage. For a few days, everything seems fine. Catherine is weak but recovering. The baby is healthy. Letters written during these days express cautious optimism. Thomas sends word to London announcing the safe delivery of his daughter. Then puerperal fever sets in. Within hours, Catherine's temperature spikes. She becomes delirious. The fever, what we now understand as bacterial infection from childbirth, but what Tudor physicians couldn't identify or treat, ravages her system. According to eyewitness accounts recorded by John Fox, Catherine begins speaking wildly, her fever-dream mind mixing religious devotion with accusations. She tells Thomas she's dying. Then she tells him he's been unkind to her. Then she prays. Then she accuses him again. Her ladies try to calm her, but the delirium makes her say things they'll remember and testify to later, that she's been unhappy, that Thomas cares more about his ambitions than about her, that she regrets things she won't specify. Thomas sits by her bed. According to his later testimony, he tries to comfort her, tells her she'll recover, promises to be a better husband. But Catherine knows she's dying. She's seen enough deathbeds, 3 husbands, countless court ladies, to recognise the signs. On September 5th, 1548, 6 days after giving birth, Catherine Parr dies at Sudeley Castle. She's 36 years old. She survived 3 marriages, including 4 years as Henry VIII's wife, only to die from childbirth complications in what was supposed to be her happy ending. The funeral is rushed and small. According to household accounts, Thomas doesn't manage the arrangements well. VIII. Service is conducted according to Protestant rites, Catherine's religious preferences honoured. But there's confusion about protocol. How do you bury a former Queen of England in a castle chapel? What precedence does she deserve? Princess Elizabeth, sent away from Catherine's household months earlier, doesn't attend. Whether she wasn't informed in time or chose not to come remains unclear. Princess Mary doesn't attend either. The estrangement over Catherine's remarriage was never fully healed. Within weeks, Thomas Seymour is courting Princess Elizabeth again. He's talking about marriage, never mind that she's 14 and he's 41 and barely widowed. The baby Mary, Catherine's daughter, disappears from the historical record within months. No death is recorded, no mention of her upbringing or guardianship appears in documents. She simply vanishes, probably dying in infancy like so many Tudor babies, unmourned and unrecorded, because she wasn't a son and her father was too busy plotting treason to ensure her story was preserved. By January 1549, 16 months after Catherine's death, Thomas Seymour is arrested for high treason. The charges include attempting to marry Princess Elizabeth without permission, trying to kidnap King Edward VI to control the young king personally, and embezzling from the navy he was supposed to command. His brother, Edward Seymour, the Lord Protector, signs his death warrant. On March 20th, 1549, Thomas Seymour is beheaded on Tower Hill. He's 41 years old. His last words, according to the Chronicle of Edward Hall, are defiant but incoherent. Something about the Seymour family's loyalty to the crown, as if that will save him at this point. Edward Seymour doesn't survive much longer. The stress of executing his own brother, combined with his own political mistakes, leads to his downfall. He's arrested in 1551 and executed in 1552. Both Seymour brothers destroy each other through ambition, paranoia, and an inability to work together. The family that seemed destined to rule England through their connection to King Edward VI implodes in less than 5 years. King Edward VI lives only until 1553. He dies at 15, possibly from tuberculosis, possibly from complications of the aggressive medical treatments his physicians inflicted on him. Princess Elizabeth survives. She's questioned intensively about her relationship with Thomas Seymour after his arrest, but she navigates the interrogation brilliantly, admitting nothing that could be used against her. She becomes Queen Elizabeth I in 1558 and never marries, perhaps remembering what she learned in Catherine Parr's household about the dangers of passion and politics mixing. So what do we do with this story? What does it tell us about Catherine Parr's choices, and what happens to women when power structures shift? First, consider what Catherine actually gained from marrying Thomas Seymour. She got 16 months of nominal happiness, though those months were complicated by Thomas's inappropriate behaviour with Elizabeth, his financial recklessness, and his inability to prioritise Catherine over his political ambitions. She got a pregnancy that killed her. She got a daughter who disappeared from history. In exchange, she lost her political independence, her dignity in the eyes of her stepchildren, and ultimately her life. Was it worth it? That's the question that haunts this story. Was Catherine's decision to marry Thomas an act of agency, choosing love after years of marriages chosen for her? Or was it a desperate grasp for protection in a world that had stripped away her power the moment Henry died? Was Thomas the love she'd waited years to claim? Or was he an opportunist who saw Catherine as a means to wealth and status? Here's what historian Linda Porter argues in her biography of Catherine. The marriage was both things simultaneously. Catherine made a choice, yes, but she made it from a position of extreme vulnerability in a system designed to give widows minimal options. She could remarry and potentially gain a protector, or she could remain alone and become increasingly marginal as the new regime solidified. The romantic narrative, long-deferred love finally fulfilled, exists alongside the pragmatic reality of a woman navigating limited choices in a dangerous political environment. And Thomas? The evidence suggests he was genuinely attracted to Catherine, but he was also a man whose ambition consistently overrode his judgment. He wanted Catherine's wealth and prestige. He wanted to best his brother. He wanted power he hadn't earned. And when Catherine was dying, his response wasn't grief-stricken devotion. It was confusion and resentment that she dared to criticise him with her last breaths. What's fascinating is how quickly everyone forgot Catherine after she died. She'd been Queen of England, regent of the kingdom, author of published religious writings, and one of the most educated women of her generation. She outlived Henry VIII, an achievement only one of his 6 wives managed. Yet within a year of her death, she'd become a footnote to Thomas Seymour's treason, an explanation for why Princess Elizabeth knew him. The woman who survived Henry VIII was remembered primarily as the wife of the man who betrayed the crown. The pattern here repeats throughout history. Women who navigate impossible situations by making pragmatic choices get remembered either as romantic heroines or as cautionary tales, rarely as complex human beings trying to survive in systems designed to eliminate their agency. Catherine made the best choice she could from the options available to her. That it ended in tragedy doesn't mean the choice was wrong. It means the system was designed to make any choice a widow made potentially catastrophic. Think about the questions this raises about power transitions. When a regime changes, when the powerful person dies and new people take control, what happens to everyone? Who was connected to the old power structure? They vanish. Their expertise becomes irrelevant. Their relationships become suspect. Their very existence becomes a problem to be managed. Catherine went from ruling England as regent to being erased from political life within weeks, and her attempts to remain visible, to maintain some agency, led directly to the situation that killed her. This is the story of every transition of power played out at the personal level. The old regime's people don't get to continue on new terms. They get swept away, and if they resist or try to carve out new positions, they risk everything. Catherine risked everything by marrying Thomas. She lost. But here's what you should take from this. Catherine Parr wasn't a victim, and she wasn't a fool. She was a woman who understood exactly how precarious her position was, who weighed her options, and who made a calculated gamble that love and alliance with Thomas Seymour would be better than slow marginalisation into forgotten widowhood. She gambled wrong, but the game was rigged from the start. No move she made, not marrying Thomas, not staying single, not appealing to the Council for protection, would have guaranteed safety in the power struggle that followed Henry VIII's death. Her story matters because it reveals the mechanics of how powerful women lose power the moment the source of that power disappears. It matters because it shows how desire and calculation mix in every human decision, especially in high-stakes political environments. And it matters because Catherine Parr, intelligent, educated, capable, made choices that seemed rational at the time and were destroyed by circumstances she couldn't control. The Queen married her husband's killer 4 months after he died. But that opening statement, shocking as it is, obscures more than it reveals. Catherine married a man who'd been involved in the court politics that hastened Henry's death, yes. But she married him because in the brutal calculus of Tudor succession politics, having an ambitious husband with a place on the Privy Council seemed safer than having no protection at all. She was wrong. But her reasoning wasn't foolish. It was the rational response of someone trapped in an irrational system. She survives in history not because of what she accomplished, but because of the scandal of her last marriage and the tragedy of her death. And maybe that's the final injustice. Catherine Parr, who deserved to be remembered as the woman who survived Henry VIII and ruled England in his absence, is instead remembered as the woman who married too quickly, chose unwisely, and died in childbirth. History reduces her to a cautionary tale when she deserved to be celebrated as a survivor. Thanks for sticking with this journey through one of Tudor history's most complicated stories. If this got you thinking about power, survival, and the impossible choices women faced in environments designed to erase them, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching this at some ungodly hour because you need history to occupy your mind, know that you're not alone. We're all out here in the dark, learning things they didn't teach us in school, trying to understand how people navigated systems that seem alien and familiar at the same time. Subscribe if you want more of this, stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about how power works and how little it's changed over 500 years. Next time, we'll dig into another historical moment that seems impossible, but reveals something essential about human nature under pressure. For now, think about Catherine Parr when you encounter stories about women making bad choices. Ask yourself, what were her other options? What would you have done in a world where every door was locked and every key was held by someone who wanted you to disappear? She chose the door marked love and protection. It led to her death, but at least she chose. In the Tudor court for a woman, even that was extraordinary.